Good morning. I'm Ashley Rooney from Lexington Remembers World War II Committee. Today, we have JimSilva. James Lawrence Silva is his real name. He's a World War II vet, a P-51 pilot, a POW, and then he went back to fight the Korean War. He's going to be quite a story he's going to tell us. So let me introduce Jim. Jim, why don't you tell us how it all began? You moved into Lexington when you were a mere babe.
Yep.
Yep. And you went to Lexington High School?
I went to Parker School and then Muzzy Junior High and high school, yeah. On Mass
Right.
Avenue.
And you graduated in 1942. And you
Yeah.
were a member of the soccer and golf teams, I understand.
Yes.
Great.
And when I graduated, World War II was on the way. We had been bombed by Japanese. And so I could feel the hot breath of the draft on the back of my neck. So I figured I better do something. And I wanted to be a pilot. So I enrolled in Northeastern as a freshman, figuring if I had a year of college, I might have a better chance of getting what I wanted. And I went 2 weeks after I got out of Lexington. I went to Northeastern as a freshman, and they later agreed to let me finish my freshman year, which I did. And in April, I went on active duty, and I went down to through 4th Avenue down to Nashville to the reclassification center. And there they gave me all kinds of tests to figure out my mental and physical and emotional state, all kinds of tests. And I passed them all and became a candidate to become a fighter pilot.
Wow. You were age 19 at that point.
Yeah. The interesting part so far is I grew up, my family didn't have a car.
Oh.
So I never drove a car so far up to this point. And
so there you were steering an airplane?
Yeah, I walked, I rode a bicycle, and then once in a while I took a bus, but never a car.
Wow.
So this is going to be a different experience for me.
Your parents must have been overwhelmed with the fact that you were flying an airplane and they didn't have a car.
I think so. I think they were. They never said too much about it, but I'm not sure they liked me going into the war.
Oh, I'm sure they didn't.
But the other part was okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But it must have been very terrifying for them. There you were up in the air flying and they didn't even drive. That was overwhelming.
So I went down to Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama, to pre-flight. Went through a couple of months there, physical training and learning the Army way to do things and all that sort of thing. And after 2 months there, I went to Bennettsville, South Carolina. There I learned to fly. And that's where the picture is of the biplane that you have where I'm with my brother. That's where I learned to fly. And that's where, after 8 hours, I soloed.
Wow. After 8 hours, you were soloing?
Yeah. And the instructor goes up with you up to that point, and always, and he teaches you to land and take off and all that sort of thing. And when he thinks you're ready and won't kill yourself, he lets you go up by yourself.
That must have been incredible.
And you won't get lost when you get up there, because they teach you all the boundaries they want you to stay in.
Do you remember how you felt that first time?
Huh?
How did you feel that first time? Were you scared or were you like, whoa, I'm finally up here?
A little bit of both at that first time.
Yeah. Had you already learned how to parachute out?
No, that came much later.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it was a very slow moving, underpowered airplane. So it was there to teach us to fly and using air currents and all this sort of thing. Later on, we got the fighters. We can use power to pull yourself out of a situation. So this one was very underpowered. And I learned to do loops and slow rolls and snap rolls.
What's a snappo?
A snap roll is when you turn the plane around very fast. You don't have time to really see what's going on. You pull the stick back and to the right, and the plane just whips around.
So you go upside down.
As opposed to a slow roll where you gradually make the turn and and you control your stuff so your plane stays level and all that sort of thing. So we learned all kinds of maneuvers, learning to coordinate the rudder pedals and the stick for the ailerons on the wings. And so that's what we were doing in that one, learning to coordinate and fly the plane. We were learning flying. That was 2 months in there. And at the end of that time, you get a check ride with a different instructor. And if he passes you, you continue on to the next phase. If he doesn't, you go out of the program. You wash out. So the next phase would be 2 months in basic training. And that would be a little heavier plane, a single wing. And there we learned to fly nights and formation and as well as all the previous maneuvers of loops and rolls and stuff. So we did 2 months of that sort of thing, formation flying and night flying and stuff. And at the end of that time, we had a check ride by a different instructor. And again, if we passed, we moved on. And then we went to advanced flying. And that was a little heavier plane, a little bigger plane. And we learned all those things, the same things we learned before, but we also added some new things of formation flying and stuff, and night flying, and a little gunnery in there. And once we graduated from that place, we went to another field. Up till now, the instructor always rode with us for the first few rides when we hit a new plane. And then after he thought you could handle it okay, he left and you were on your own. After advanced flying, we went in a fighter plane, a P-40, which only had one seat. So he never went with me.
No.
I went first time, and the P-40 had a long nose in front of you, and you couldn't see anything in front of you. And so the first time up, I was on my own. And that's when they told me that the P-40 had an unusual characteristic on takeoff, and it would be about halfway down the runway, the right rudder pedal would kick me back, and I had to kick it right back in. I handled that, and it worked. So we took off, but you could tell people were scared because they would be taking off and flying out of sight in the distance, and the wheels were still down. They hadn't taken their hands off any of the controls, the stick or the throttle,
Yeah.
So people were a little bit uptight there, but we get used to it after a while.
Right. Did you lose anybody in flight training? I mean, did anybody?
Yes.
I assume people washed out. Did anybody die?
Oh yeah, people washed out, and people were in basic training. Was the first time we lost anybody. That was the second stage, and people like to fly low, right on the ground, over, so you had to flip over trees and stuff. They really didn't have that much experience flying, so sometimes they didn't quite make it, and they would crash into something. And they would bring a big flat butt flatbed truck under the base, and they would leave it on show there. So you see pieces of meat hanging from various parts of the airplane. And I think they were trying to give us a message, not to stay down low and buzz.
Right.
We weren't supposed to do that because we weren't ready for that. And then other than that, we didn't have any big problems. People just washed out because they weren't able to do the things well enough. And so then we went down to Sarasota, and there we flew P-40s all the time. And there we learned gunnery, both shooting things on the ground targets, and shooting things in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we learned fighter tactics and stuff.
Did you have a crew by then, or?
No, well, just a one-man plane.
Okay, so you're still flying solo. Okay.
All the while until Korea, I never had a crew. They were always one-man plane, one-seat plane.
Oh, that must have been lonely.
Yeah, so well, it was nice. It was a little smaller, and they maneuvered well, and I loved to do all the aerobatics up there, and I loved to down south. They have some nice big cumulus clouds, and we used to dive in them and dive around holes in them, and we used to play tag, follow the leader,
Yep. Yep.
We had a great time. I loved that. Great flying.
So when did you go abroad?
Well, after Sarasota, I went to Meridian, Mississippi. I heard they had P-51s there, and I wanted to fly a P-51 because they were beautiful airplanes. And so I went there for 2 months, and I learned reconnaissance kind of techniques as well as artillery adjustment and stuff like that. And I was there for 2 months, and then I went overseas after that.
And where were you based overseas? England?
Overseas, we landed in Europe, and a couple of weeks later, we went into France. But we were in Normandy, and we didn't have, there were no real paved runways or anything. We had steel strips they put down for us to land and take off.
So this was after
This was after D-Day.
After D-Day. Okay.
Yeah, we got in France in early September, and but they were still close to Normandy. They didn't. The D-Day was held up from June 6th to July 27th by the hedgerows. They couldn't advance any further. And,
right.
But they broke out of there about July 27th. And so we were there. Patton broke out, but he wanted to go real fast. So he went real fast toward Paris. And he didn't leave any troops on his right flank to protect the right flank. And our job was to do reconnaissance of that right flank and find out if there were any troop concentrations, any trucks or tanks, or any activity by the enemy there.
Mm-hmm.
We would phone it back in, radio that back in, and they would send a bunch of fighters out to take care of it. And he would send some troops back from the front of his drive, the point of his drive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we were doing there, is the reconnaissance. And the reconnaissance is a two-man flight, and one man stays low, maybe down on 1,000 feet. And on the flight I was on, the reconnaissance man was down there. I was up about 5,000 feet, and I was providing cover so that no one would jump him and no surprise him, come up and shoot him down. That's what I was there to protect him.
Right.
And so I was up at 5,000 feet, but I was flying to the left and right and up and down 1,000 feet at a time, and keeping my eyes open for the skies and anything down low that might jump him. So that way he could concentrate on the reconnaissance. And that's when I got in trouble.
Tell us about when you got into trouble.
Yeah. Well, I was looking all around and checking the skies and all this stuff. And one time I looked around and I looked forward again. And when I did, I saw all these black puffs. There was a big cube of these black anti-aircraft puffs above me, below me, in front of me, behind me, all around me. And then I felt the plane get lifted up about 5 or 10 feet. And I said, whoa, that was a close one. And it was. That was one that hit me. And so I called down to Captain Smith and told him I'd been hit. And he came up to help me. But, the engine was getting rougher, and pretty soon smoke was coming out, and coming outside, and also coming in through the inside to the cockpit, so I couldn't see the instrument panel.
Oh boy.
And I had less power, so I was gradually starting to lose altitude. And I had cranked the canopy open to get the smoke out of the cockpit, so maybe I could see the instrument panel. And the smoke got heavy enough where that didn't help, so I figured I was going to have to bail out. Also, the plane was losing altitude. So the way you get out of a P-51, there are two options they usually give you. One is to undo your seatbelt and your shoulder harness and your throat mic and your headset. And then you hit the crank to release the canopy. There's a handle that it releases the whole bubble canopy. And you turn the plane over and just drop out. And that's one way.
Yeah.
I didn't like that way.
I could see one. Something about turning the plane over. Gone.
Yeah.
So what did you do?
The other way was to undo your harness, shoulder harness, and seatbelt, and the throat mic and stuff, and then pull the crank and release the canopy, and climb out on the wing, and slide off the trailing edge of the wing, if you can.
Wow.
Wing that long. But I had a little hitch. I had opened the canopy to with the crank to let the smoke out.
Right.
And when I was going out, I didn't release the canopy. I just was going out because the crank had opened it. And I started out and I had forgotten to disconnect my throat mic and my headset. So I slid back in and disconnected those. On the way back out, my knee hit the crank, which rolled the canopy back. And the canopy slid closed with me half in and half out. And I had forgotten that I needed to release the canopy because the canopy was already open. And so I did a lot of kicking and pushing and pulling and tugging.
And the plane is losing altitude. Oh,
the plane was going downhill all this time.
Oh boy.
And so I finally got enough of me out. And the plane must have been going about 350 something miles per hour, and it slipstream. I got enough of me out, so the slipstream just yanked me right out of there. And when it did, then I checked to see if the plane wasn't around me and pulled the ripcord for the parachute. When I finally pulled the parachute to open it, I was only about 2 or 3 heights up in the air, so I didn't have much longer going down.
Yeah.
And I looked down. I saw I was heading right to land, right in the middle of my fiery plane. The plane was on fire. And we didn't have steerable parachutes then. So and you can pull the ripcord, the shroud lines a little bit, and you can slide a little bit dangerous, because if you pull a little too much, you'll slip the air out from under the parachute and you just drop down. So they didn't recommend you do that, and I wasn't too happy with landing in the fire either. And I noticed that I was automatically drifting a little bit off the fire. So I landed in the field, and in the same field the plane was in, and I was gathering up the chute to head for the hedgerows, and so I could dive over them and get in cover. And I heard gunfire, and I thought, oh boy, they're shooting at me. And so I started running across the field, and the shroud lines would catch on bushes, and I would tumble, and everything, but I just kept going, and I got to the hedgerow, and I dove over the hedgerow. Wow. By the time I was diving over the hedgerow, I realized they weren't firing me. That was my own ammunition getting cooked off with fire. Yeah. So that was good. So I started burying the parachute in the leaves at the base of this hedgerow, and I was just about done, and I looked up, and about 80 feet away or something, I saw this German leveling a rifle toward me. Oh. So I had to make a quick decision. Do I run or do I give up? I figured I could still run pretty fast then. But then I thought, well, I don't know. And it's a good thing I didn't run, because on the other side of the hedgerow, another German had come down in a camouflage cape, and he was about 15 feet away from me. So if I had decided to run, he could have shot me he wouldn't have missed. Yeah, wouldn't have missed. Oh, yeah. Boy. And so, how old were you in all this? You were about 22 this time? No, I was 20. 20. Oh. Yeah, it was 1944. I was born in 24. Oh, wow. So, yeah, it a little more excitement than I had planned for. Yeah. So your hands went up, and they took you as a prisoner. They took me to the anti-aircraft station and sat me there, and then pretty soon an officer came in the car, and he took me to a house, and there they sat me in the dining room, and the woman was in the kitchen cooking food. So they brought a German private in, who spoke very good English, and he had worked for the Canard ship lines, and so he knew all about the United States. He knew about baseball. He knew about major leagues, minor leagues, and all that stuff. And so we had a good lunch there. They gave me a cigar, which I didn't smoke, so I gave it to him. And his purpose was he was trying to get information from me. I didn't give him any. So that they treated me very nicely there. And then we left there after lunch and went down to the river, and I took the ferry across the river, and hoping that the Americans wouldn't strafe the tugboat. Yes. And they lost their way. They finally found their way to Camp Franco, the camp where I was kept. And they put me in solitary confinement. It really wasn't solitary confinement, because there were fleas and rats in there. There was a pile of hay in the corner that I slept on, and there was rats underneath there chewing. When I put my head down, I could hear them. Oh. Yeah. They didn't chew on you, though. Yeah, no, they didn't. That was very good. I guess I wasn't tasty enough. And then they took me out and interrogated me briefly, and I just gave my name, rank, and serial number, and they put me back in solitary confinement. And the next day, they took me out to interrogate me, and this guy was a professional interrogator. He was much better, but he didn't get any more information from me. I just gave him name, rank, and serial number. They want to know, where I flew from, how many planes, what we were doing, and all kinds of stuff like that. And I didn't give him any of that. And after a couple of days of that, he pulled out a gun and put it on the table, and he said, I can take you out back. There was a big swamp on back of this camp. And he said, I can take you out there in the swamp and shoot you, and no one would ever know. So you better think about giving me some information that I want to hear. And I didn't. So he put me back in solitary. And then it took me out another day. And he said, I'm getting impatient here. I can take you out and shoot you. Don't stretch me too much, And no one would ever know because it's a big swamp out there. So I went back into solitary. They gave me time to think about that.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I can give them my home address. My folks were nobody of any importance to them. And so when I get out, I gave them my home address, and they let me out.
Wow.
Yeah. And
they never hurt you in all that time?
No torture, no nothing. The food was horrible in the camp. We would get a loaf of bread with about 5 people sharing a loaf of bread. And once in a while, there might be a piece of cheese, a small piece of cheese. And for lunch and dinner combined, we would get a bowl of potato soup with no potatoes. The Germans would take all the potatoes out, and we would get the rest of it.
The watery stuff.
Yeah,
Well, were there other Americans there? Were there Americans or Brits? I mean, who were your fellow prisoners?
The fellow prisoners there were 19 Americans and 3 British and 1 French guy, supposedly. I didn't know he was Russian then, but he was labeled as French then to us.
Yeah.
So I was in charge of the 19 Americans, and the other people didn't really care about them. So I had to take care of my 19 guys. And
how did you get to be in charge of them?
I was a second lieutenant, and they were all enlisted men. They were infantry and tank people, armored drivers and tank drivers, and they all had all interesting stories about how they were captured and how many people were shot while they were fighting the Germans before they got captured. And much worse than mine, because they're walking on patrol and suddenly the lead scout would be shot right in the head and drop down.
No.
And so that's not a very good sight.
No, it's not. Have you stayed in touch with these people?
Huh?
Have you stayed in contact with these guys?
Some of them later on. About 50 years after I got out, when we were there, when we were exchanged, I had a 100-franc note, and everybody signed their home address on that note. And so about 50 years later, I thought, well, let me see if I can get in touch with any of these guys. Because I had a video of us marching out, and I thought I would send it to them. And so I got about 11 people out of the 19.
That's great.
Yes, that was good. And I got some very nice letters back about these guys saying that their sons had never seen their grandfather and so forth. And here they could see him actually marching, actually moving out. And they were so excited about that. And I was glad I did that.
Yeah. I wondered who took that video. Was that Red Cross?
The video was of our marching. When we get out, I looked up the road. I got all the guys off the bus, and we had, less than a quarter of a mile. ahead was a whole group of people. And I told our guys, I said, up there's probably high-ranking American officers, high-ranking German officers. And I said, there'll be a lot of photographers and all that sort of thing. And so I said, let's make it good. We'll look good.
Oh,
Heads up and shoulders back, and we'll show them we're Americans.
that's great. Did you get out at the end of the war or before?
Before the end of the war.
Oh.
I got out in November of '44, November 29th.
Oh, that was great.
I was in prison about 2.5 months.
You probably lost a lot of weight.
I did.
That weak potato soup.
I lost some weight, yeah.
Yeah.
And so these guys marched up there, and it brought tears to my eyes the way they were so straight and shoulders back. And they had been in prison, some of them longer than I had. And so we marched right into the crew, and there were photographers all over the place. There were American Army photographers, there were German photographers, there were commercial photographers, and all kinds of people. So a lot of people took pictures of them marching, of us marching through there.
Wow.
And so
at that point, were you sent home? That was the end of the war for you?
I had a choice, and but the war was going on in the Pacific, and I knew, because I hadn't been over there very long in France, so I knew if I went home, I'd get a month's leave, and they would ship me out to the Pacific. And I didn't swim that well, so I thought I would stay with my crew. So I asked if I could stay with my squadron, and they said, well, yeah, we'll get an okay, I guess, with the Geneva Convention. If they had caught me again in the same theater of operations, they could do anything they want with me. So I needed to get an okay from General Eisenhower's staff. And so I had to wait till I got that okay. So in the meantime, I was flying planes that were all shot up and repaired, make sure they were okay to fly missions again and stuff like that. And ferrying planes until I finally got the okay. And then when I finally got home, after the war ended, I went back to Northeastern. Finished getting my BS in mechanical engineering, but I carpooled two girls from Arlington and from Lexington. By now I was driving. I lived in Lexington and they lived in Arlington, so it was right on the way. So I carpooled the two of them into Boston. And one of them got peppered. We began to get a little closer. Carpooling turned to dating. And so we dated for a while and went on various dates and stuff. And after I get through with Northeastern, graduated from there, while I was looking for a job, I got a letter that asking me to go back, not asking me, telling me to go back in the service. They were going to send me to Korea. And so that's how I got into Korea. And while I was in Korea, Dot and I corresponded via snail mail. And she would send me nice pictures of herself. And so I proposed to her via snail mail. And she accepted via snail mail. So after I got home from Korea, after flying my 33 missions over there, we got married.
Wow. You had 33 missions in Korea?
Yeah.
Wow. Were you still doing reconnaissance or were you doing another kind of plane?
I was in a 2-engine B-26. It was, we were armed reconnaissance. We had we were fighting now,
Mm-hmm.
and we had B-26s, which had 8 guns in the nose, 850 caliber guns in the nose, and 3 in each wing. So that's 14 50 caliber uh, guns, and the wing guns were aimed in so that they would merge about 1,000 feet out, and so when all 14 guns hit something, they really knew it. It would take a 2.5-ton truck and just blow it right off the road.
Wow.
So we were flying nights because the North Koreans had come down and they had driven everybody, the South Koreans and the Americans, down almost off the peninsula. And so the Americans got in there soon enough to stop that, but then they were still bringing supplies and troops down at night. So we were flying over there at night to stop the people from North Koreans from bringing down troops and ammunition and tanks and stuff. And so that's what we were doing.
Mm.
Yeah. We did all kinds of, the first trip there, we was a little funny. We saw a truck coming down the road. This was at night, but we could see well enough. And he ducked in the woods. He heard us, I guess. So after we flew our mission around looking for targets and shooting up other targets, we came back down the road. And there he was out on the road again. So, so this time he didn't get away. But we also flew. We got a call to go over on one hill because the Americans were in trouble. The North Koreans were on one side of the hill and the Americans were on the other. And so we flew over there, and the flare ship had lit up, so it was like daylight. So we flew down and machine guns and rocketed the enemy on the other side of the hill, just over the ridge. And then we'd fly around again and hit another spot. And the people on the ground would tell us where they wanted us to hit, where they were getting a lot of casualties from some spots. So we would hit the spots they would tell us, and then we would hit the spots of people who were firing at us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did a lot of work there, and the guys on the ground thanked us and said they were all set now, they could move. And so we did a lot of holes in the plane there, though.
Bet you did. So how many years were you in the military?
I was in from April to 44. And for about in Europe, I was there for about a year and a half, and I was at Korea. I went in September or August, and I was there August of 50.
In February 52, I have.
52, yeah. That was February of 52.
So did you get to come home at all while you were in Korea, or just
No,
you and Dot kept writing?
no, that was work.
Wow. But then you came home and married Dot and had 3 daughters.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
so there was a happy ending to the story.
Oh yeah. There's a happy ending. Yeah, we got married. I got out February 2nd. We got married in March 15th, and Dot's mother had lost a son in World War II. He was in naval aviation.
No.
She also lost her husband about 8 months before we got married.
Oh.
So she was alone. So we moved in with her so she wouldn't be lonely. And we stayed with her for a couple of years. A little bit interesting being just married and being in a bedroom next to your mother-in-law.
Yes.
But she was a great mother-in-law.
Okay.
And after a couple of years, we moved out to Lexington
Ah,
and bought a house there and raised a family there.
and raised the family there.
Yeah.
And settled down. And did you still fly planes casually, or was that the end of your flying experience?
So after World War II, I still used to fly, go up to Bedford,
Yeah.
out a plane, and go sightseeing and buzz the Winnipesaukee boat.
Oh, yeah.
And
So
yeah,
looking back, how do you feel about your whole service? I mean, you've told a wonderful story. You certainly have great memories here, very good. They're all very clear.
yeah.
Was it a wonderful thing?
Yes, I learned a lot. I learned, and I had a marvelous time flying. I enjoyed flying in World War II. Korea, not so much. I was flying at night up and down the valleys in the mountains, and stuff. And just the flying was not easy.
Yeah.
But World War II, I liked flying. The P-51 was a marvelous plane to fly, and you could do acrobatics and all kinds of things. So I liked that part of it. I learned a lot.
Do you still get out there when the Blue Angels come, and to watch them do their stuff?
We used to go up in the clouds, and after the war, we used to continue to practice like ground gunnery on the lake. They'd have targets on the lake. We'd go down there, and the people running the target thing would have a couple of nurses or something there, or some women there, a couple of women there, and so we would get on targets and show off. After we scrape the targets, we turn over and do a slow roll on the way up. And so we did all kinds of things like that. And some of the men had brothers and stuff in the German cities, so we used to go down there and get on the main street below the buildings, and buzz through there. So it was fun. I like the flying.
But I think it's great that the boy who grew up in a family without a car ended up, I don't know what you call it, piloting a B-51 plane over France and so forth. That's amazing when you think of that story.
Yeah, yeah. I was. When I thought about it once in a while, I felt good about it. That I was able to do that, and just
Yeah,
to
you should.
do maneuvers.
Yeah. Well, we thank you. Go enjoy your beautiful Sunday. It's a gorgeous day out there, a little cold, but go enjoy it. And thank you so much for talking to us.
And the other thing we do is a loop, but when you're up at the top, we roll it over so we're right side up again. Yeah, we did lazy eights and when learning. In the airplanes, you have a needle and a ball, and the ball is like a carpenter's thing, and it tells you whether you're going straight. If you put too much rudder, that ball will slide off. So when you're doing these maneuvers, you're looking at that ball that it's staying in the center, and that's what these maneuvers like a lazy eight, which is like the horizontal eight with the loops elevator. And you do a climbing left turn, and you do a diving left turn, and so forth. Doing eights, and all that time you're keeping an eye on that ball to make sure you're coordinated and flying straight rather than slipping. If you're doing a roll, you're doing this.
Right. Okay.
And if you're doing a snap roll, it's the same thing. You don't do a snap roll with fighters; they can't take the stress on it. But it would be the same thing, but it would be zipping right around. If you're doing a loop, you're going up this way, and then back down. If you're doing what they call an Immelman, which is a fighter tactic you can use. You would do a half a loop and then rotate the plane so you're right side up again.
Hmm.
I don't know if you can see enough of that in the picture.
Yep.
And when you want to fly, when you're flying, you want to fly straight, and so that ball is right in the middle. And if you're flying this way, you're not getting maximum efficiency because your propellers are pushing you that way and you're going that way. So you want that ball to be right in the middle, so you're flying right toward the nose, and you get a maximum speed out of it that way. You don't do too much instrument flying in a fighter, but in the B-26 we did a lot of instrument flying. So, but yeah, if you were flying, no matter whether you're flying visually or in the clouds, if you're in the clouds, you're just following your instruments. You can't see the ground or anything else.
Hmm.
So you're following the needle and the ball and the airspeed, and you have a gyro compass and all that. So in the picture that you've got of the inside of the cockpit of the 51 is a group of instruments. The main instruments you use when you fly are in that white line that's painted in the instrument panel.